Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Arizona Illustrated for Friday, the 5th of May, 2012. I'm Jim Nintzel, host of Political Roundtable, our weekly analysis and commentary on local, state, and national politics. Tonight on the Roundtable, we'll sort through the claims and political ads in the race to finish Gabby Gifford's congressional term. Plus, we'll look at the highlights from the legislative session that wrapped up this week and talk about proposed changes to the widening of Broadway Boulevard. Joining me this evening is Republican strategist Sam Stone and Pima County Democratic Party Chairman Jeff Rogers. Thank you both for being here. Jeff, we've got 2 weeks until the early ballots start going out in this race between Ron Barber and Jesse Kelly to finish Gabby Gifford's congressional term. Where do you see the race at this point?
I think it's going to be a tight race. I predict Barber will win between 5 to 7 points, maybe a little bit more than that. But we're working right now still on getting people on the permanent early voter list and on registering voters that aren't registered. And so we've got a crew of people leaving Democrat headquarters every afternoon, mostly young folks who are doing that job. And I think we're positioned fairly well for right now.
And Sam, you've been involved in this race as a spokesperson for one of Jesse Kelly's, the Republican candidates, one of Jesse Kelly's rivals, Colonel Martha McSally, who came in second in the Republican primary. This is a very interesting situation in that we have the special election coming up in June, but a regular election cycle with a primary in August and then a general in November. And Colonel McSally says she would run in the race in the fall if Jesse Kelly does not win, but will stand down if he does win this primary here.
Yeah, that's correct. She's not going to take on an incumbent Republican, but if Ron Barber should happen to win this race, and I agree with my colleague here, I think it's going to be a very close, well-contested special election. But if Ron Barber wins, then Colonel McSally will be stepping up to run for CD2 at that point.
Okay. And where do you see the race at this point in terms of the dynamics of what's going on out there?
It's a very interesting race, and I think there's a considerable lack of understanding nationally for how early these elections get decided here with our early ballots. Jesse Kelly was very, very effective chasing those in the primary. I expect him and his team to be very effective doing the same for the general election. Obviously, he has essentially 100% name ID. Where Ron Barber's still having to build some name ID, people don't really know who he is or what he stands for, and we're running out of time really fast. I think that benefits Jesse Kelly quite a bit.
And Jeff,
well, I think probably we have one of the most stellar get-out-the-vote operations in the entire United States in this county for the Democratic Party. We're one of the few parties anywhere in the nation that owns a predictive dialer, which we run hour after hour after hour chasing these ballots. And that's why, as Sam indicated, these things can be decided very early because the minute these ballots drops, we'll be calling everybody who has a ballot and multiple times until they've turned their ballot in. And so the ballot chase is where these things are won or lost in these early ballots. I think you'll see probably one of the smallest election day votes of all time, particularly being on June 12th as it is. But the ballot chase is where it's at.
And right now, I think people are just becoming aware of how soon this election is coming up, and we are getting the big money finally rolling in that we'd seen this week. Both the National Republican Congressional Committee and the Democratic Congressional Committee began rolling out ads. Let's take a look at the ad that the Republicans are running right now.
Because I've seen what we need to do. Rebuild our middle class.
That sounds nice. But Ron Barber supported the same failing agenda that has hurt Arizona. Barber supported Obamacare, which cuts $500 billion in Medicare and puts a board of unelected bureaucrats in charge. Positions on the issues matter. We can send Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi a rubber stamp. The National Republican Congressional Committee is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Okay, before we discuss this one, I want to say that the ad has two claims that have been declared false by PolitiFact, and one involves the claim of $500 billion in Medicare cuts, and the other involves whether an independent board would be in charge of making all decisions. And this is what PolitiFact had to say about this. There's a small bit of truth here. The Affordable Care Act does reduce Medicare spending by $500 billion over the next 10 years, but there's a catch. those dollars aren't taken out of the current budget. They are not actual cuts, and nowhere does the bill actually eliminate any current benefits. The $500 billion is all spent in future spending, and reductions come through the law's attempts to slow projected growth, not cut spending. Medicare spending is expected to increase. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office projects Medicare spending will reach $929 billion in 2012, up from $499 billion in actual spending in 2009. So that is the PolitiFacts debunking of this particular claim, which we've seen quite a bit in the last couple of years, ever since the passage of Obamacare. Jeff.
Well, that's correct. This is sort of the Republican version of Joseph Goebbels' propaganda idea of tell the great big lie and keep telling the great big lie over and over again until people begin to believe that it's true. They used this in one of the special elections. I think it was in Oregon or Washington recently as well. So, you know, what you have to realize is if your candidate has said some of the things that Jesse Kelly has said about privatizing, eliminating Medicare and privatizing Social Security, you know, if you've said things like that and you're on the record as having said them in this very room, as well as to the Tucson Weekly and in other forums as well, then you've got to attack your opponent, because you can't be put on record as being the person who really does want to destroy Medicare and Social Security, which Jesse Kelly has gone on the record as saying he wants to do that.
And Sam, what did you think of this ad?
Well, I think it's an effective ad in that, you know, Ron Barber did say he worked with Gabrielle Giffords on helping to formulate Obamacare, which I think is a very strange boast, because if we want to talk about big lies, the big lie is that Obamacare will do anything other than drive up healthcare costs and potentially put this country in a completely untenable financial position. So I think the ad was very effective from that front. And Jesse Kelly has all his positions outlined on his website. People can go there and see what they are.
Oh, we've already seen where the so-called Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, has already saved seniors millions and millions of dollars by closing the donut hole that many of them found themselves in under the prior plan. So I think that we're seeing the cost savings, and we're seeing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who have their children still on their health care plans up to age 26. We found several here in Tucson last week that we wanted to introduce to the First Lady. So I mean we've seen. And Ron Barber doesn't believe that this plan is perfect. After all, he's come out and said, here are a few fixes I think will make this better. But everybody knew that we didn't have a chance to make all these fixes. In fact, the Republicans fought one of the best fixes that we've got, which is to basically allow Medicare to bargain with pharmaceutical companies the way the VA does in order to reduce the costs of pharmaceutical care. I mean, some of these seniors' drugs are very, very expensive. And so many of these kinds of ideas that for tweaking it and making it better are the kinds of things that Ron Barber supports.
Do you want to weigh in?
I think it's very hard to know what Ron Barber really does support or not, because he hasn't been tested in any primary. We don't know what his positions are. If you listen to him now, he sounds like a Republican, in which case I think people can just come out and vote for Jesse Kelly, because he actually does have the R after his name. And I don't think anyone buys that Ron Barber is quite as conservative as he's claiming.
Well, I don't hear him claiming that he's that radically conservative. I think he's just exactly the kind of candidate that has represented this district for 30 years. Someone who's more mainstream in the middle, not a flaming liberal nor a flaming right-wing conservative. He's somebody that represents the traditional mainstream values of this district.
Well, let's take a look actually now at the ad that the Democrats are running against Jesse Kelly in this district.
Is Jesse Kelly listening to you? Was Jesse Kelly listening to you when he said on Social Security, "I'd love to eliminate the program"? Jesse Kelly said he would work to eliminate Medicare over time. Was he listening to you then? How about when Jesse Kelly said at the same time he'd cut taxes in half for millionaires? Is Jesse Kelly listening to you? Just listen to Jesse Kelly. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee is responsible for the content of this advertisement.
So, Sam, what do you think about that particular advertisement?
Well, I think obviously Jesse Kelly is listening, because he understands people want lower gas prices, they want lower taxes, and they want less government and less regulation in their lives. So I think he's listening pretty clearly to what the voters are saying. And I think he's doing a very good job out there of representing the needs of this district right now.
Jeff?
Well, he's listening, all right. He's listening to the outrage at all of the things he said about saying seniors are on the dole, Social Security's a Ponzi scheme, I want to phase it out, eliminate it. He said it in this room. He said it to you in interviews with the Tucson Weekly. He said it at various forums where he's been videotaped and audio taped saying that, and he's running from those statements as fast and hard as he can. And he's not coming out and honestly saying, that was a mistake, I should have never said that. He's instead lying to the voters and saying, I never said that. I don't have those positions at all. In fact, I will do everything I can to protect Medicare and Social Security, which is a long way from the things he said in 2010 in that election race.
The Kelly campaign did come out this week with a pretty startling reversal on some of its positions. He says he hasn't reversed himself, but he says that, and in fact, in those interviews with me, he did say that, for the people now receiving Social Security or Medicare, they should continue to receive them, but he did want to privatize them and phase them out. And now he says he would not support in any way phasing anything out, but he also says it's not a change in his position. And I think a lot of people are scratching their heads trying to make sense of that, Sam.
Well, I think as anybody, he's going to grow and learn on the campaign trail, and we've seen that over 3 years. He's a much stronger candidate and a much better potential representative now than he was 3 years ago. And if he's developing some better nuance to his positions, I think that can only strengthen him for this contest. And, when we talk about the kind of people that serve this district, I think we all honor the sacrifice that Gabrielle Giffords made, but I think we can all look at her and say, while she ran as a blue dog, she didn't vote as one. Her voting record was as liberal as just about anybody. She was right there with Raul Grijalva. And so I think Ron Barber is coming out trying to absolutely, he's trying to take on that mantle of a person who can say one thing in a cycle and then vote a different way. And I think that's what voters have to be very careful about and hold him very accountable.
Well, just a couple of days ago, 23 prominent Republicans held a press conference with Ron Barber to endorse Ron Barber. That's the kind of mainstream person he is. One of those prominent Republicans said that, there's no way somebody who's as radical of a conservative and a bomb thrower like Jesse Kelly should be representing that district. So I think what we're seeing is that you're seeing the mainstream independents and even moderate Republicans are lining up in back of Ron Barber.
And Sam, it seems to me like the ads that we saw there were very focused on seniors, and that seems to be a key demographic in this. And it also seems as though, on the one hand, the Kelly campaign is reaching out to them and saying, these comments that I made before are being taken out of context, or I've changed my mind on them. On the other hand, the Barber campaign, and part of that is bringing out Republicans that support him, is trying to say, hey, Jesse Kelly's too radical for this district. He's too extreme. The message is these Republicans are coming over to support Ron Barber because he is too extreme.
Well, I think you look at Jesse's record, and he has been very consistent in his beliefs on a host of issues. There are some changes that he's made, but you look at this district, we've had a few of these Republicans step out of line and support Democrats before, and most of them aren't in office for that reason, and the one who is there in office likely isn't going to be in office next time he's up for election. So I think, you make your bed, you sleep in it.
And crossover votes are key to this election because it's still a Republican district.
I think they are key to it. And as I said, it's a very mainstream district with a third of the voters being independents. And those voters swing both ways to Republicans and to Democrats, as we've seen. Jim Colby had this district for over 20 years, and you couldn't find a more consummate moderate Republican than Jim Colby. And despite what Mr. Stone says, I hardly think that Gabrielle Giffords has the same voting record as Raul Grijalva. She's a far more moderate, mainstream, independent type of Democrat than Congressman Grijalva.
Well, I'm sure we'll be talking more about this race. It's going to be the marquee issue coming up over the next couple of weeks. But elsewhere in politics this week, the First Lady came to Tucson this week. Michelle Obama appearing at downtown's Fox Theater. Jeff, you were there. How was the event?
I was. I had the privilege to sit in the front row. She's a beautiful, dynamic, charismatic person. She's, I hate to say it, but she's a much more dynamic speaker than her husband is, and that's saying a lot. I mean, she's really, it was really a delight to meet her and a delight to see her on stage. The whole time she was up there, I was thinking to myself, maybe in 2016 the Obamas won't leave the White House. And
how are the band Calexico? My friends in Calexico, they do a good job.
They were wonderful. They were outstanding as always. They're just a tremendous local treasure, and I can't wait to see them again.
Okay. And Sam, a lot of controversy coming up about the First Lady's travel costs, security costs here in Tucson, and whether or not taxpayers should be on the hook for that.
Yeah, I think that is a pretty legitimate question, and it's something obviously that isn't limited to just Michelle Obama or the current president, but presidents for years now, because their security requirements are so extensive and their travel and planning requirements so extensive, it costs the local jurisdictions a huge amount of money for them to come to town. In this case, you have the president's wife, the First Lady, coming here for fundraising for her husband's campaign, and then leaving Arizona taxpayers to foot the bill. And obviously, again, this isn't a Republican or Democrat thing. I think this is a common sense thing. The president last time ran a $700 million campaign. This time it's projected to be $1 billion campaign. While we can't get our streets fixed, I think they could reimburse the local jurisdictions for those kind of events when they're traveling.
Jeff, this was something that came up when President Bush came here to raise money for Tim B. Several years ago.
Exactly. He came here and spent the night and was here for quite a bit longer than the First Lady was. I think you'll find that the bills for her visit here are going to be significantly lower, in the nature of maybe a quarter of what it cost us for Bush to come here and do the B fundraiser. So, but either way, I mean, it's a legitimate question. Do the voters want to see this happen? The other thing you have to ask is when I'm at these events, I look around and see that I'm genuinely concerned about the president or the First Lady or these people, and I see the need for the security detail, and so we have to do it. Unfortunately, this country's had enough tragedies of that type that we must do that, and so it's a necessary evil. Do the communities have to foot the bill for it? I think we all have to ask ourselves that question. But we did it for George Bush, so I don't see anything wrong with doing it at 1/4 or 1/2 the rate for the Obamas.
All right. Speaking of the president, Richard Carmona on the front page of the Washington Post this week, profiling him and his expected race against Congressman Jeff Flake, who still has a primary to get through. But one of the things that came up in that was they spoke with Jeff Flake, and what Mr. Flake said was that he hoped that the president would campaign with Obama here in Arizona because he thinks that would be a liability for Dr. Carmona.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, we saw polls last week showing that Obama ahead by 2 points or behind by 2 points, depending on which poll you look at. There was a Magellan poll that came out today, midday, that showed Carmona within 4 points of Flake, which is consistent with the previous polls we've seen. So I think it's possible for the Obama campaign to win Arizona. I think it's even growing ever more likely every day that Carmona is going to actually win this race. He's now, the polling we've seen shows him with a huge lead in southern Arizona. So I saw him last night at an event, and he indicates to me he's spending almost all of his time now in the Phoenix metro area and the rest of the state. And I think all that has to happen is for him to be introduced to the voters of Arizona. Once the people in Phoenix and Maricopa County and the rest of the state know him like we know him, this is a man that they're going to stand behind, and this is a man that they're going to see is quite a lot different than anybody else who's run for office. After all, this man's been an independent his entire life. I like to say that the reason he probably picked the Democratic Party was he's a doctor. For God's sakes, he has to look at it and say, I can't join a party that doesn't believe in science, so I've got to be a Democrat. But
Sam, I was going to say the Magellan poll that he mentioned also shows a much wider race between Obama and Romney than the polls we saw last week. And the point I think Flake was trying to make was that Obama might actually hurt Jeff Flake or hurt Richard Carmona in this state.
I think President Obama needs Richard Carmona far more than Richard Carmona needs him, with the one exception that I don't think he chose to run as a Democrat. I think he got a call from the president and said, we're going to throw a ton of money behind you if you go run for us. He wasn't independent until Christmas. He gave the White House an early Christmas present, wrapped it up with a bow. And their hope is that an unchallenged, again, no primary because they pushed Don Bivens out of the primary, candidate can say whatever he wants and hopefully help create a little room for him to pull the president along behind him, because I think Barack Obama winning this state is still highly unlikely, as much as they want it. And Richard Carmona is going to have to be his draft horse if he does, and that's why he's in this race.
All right. Councilman Steve Kosachik said earlier this week that he wanted to work on changing the widening of Broadway Boulevard, the plan that's put forward by the Regional Transportation Authority. He had a press conference, and then he came on Arizona Illustrated on Tuesday and spoke with Andrea Kelly about his plans. Let's take a look at that clip.
So what we're looking at is a $71 million project that's not necessary. We don't have the funding for it either because the county administrator has said that the $25 million that was a county part of this project, we won't even know if they'll have that available until 2016. So the voters approved a $71 million project. 42 is RTA. 42 million is RTA dollars. The message last night was use those $42 million, do some intuitive things such as keep the existing alignment, put bus pullouts in, some sound buffers, landscaping, and put the bike lanes up out of the traffic. But use the other $25 million if and when it becomes available for other projects within the city limits, such as, for instance, repairing our roads.
The Councilman Kosachik's plan, what do you think, Jeff?
Well, he brings up a good point. 25 years ago, we had a traffic study that showed what we thought things were going to be like in that Broadway corridor. Remember back then we had Rawlings, Chrysler, Plymouth, we had Holmes, Tuttle, Ford, we had the Volvo dealership, you had Matthews or Watson Chevrolet down on 22nd. That whole corridor and area was different then than it is now. And the other thing that study assumed back then was that we would finish the aviation corridor, taking us on out to I-10. They now call that the Downtown Links Project. So, all of those things didn't happen. Many things changed. But what you've got to realize is this is not easy to unravel this. We need legislative authority. We need to go back to the voters of Pima County and get them to approve any changes this drastic. There's a lesser way to handle this, and the lesser way to handle it is just do a new traffic study. And perhaps it won't support 8 lanes, instead maybe 6 lanes. But you have to realize that we can't look at this as like exactly right now, because within the next year, they're going to start working on the rest of that Downtown Links project to link Aviation Highway with I-10 so traffic won't feed straight into downtown. It'll feed out to the freeway instead, and people won't be driving through the Broadway Congress corridor to get to I-10. So we need to think in terms of when that happens, what's going to happen. Will it support 8 lanes or maybe 6 lanes? So I think it's too much to expect that we can pull this entire package apart. I think there's a middle ground between something that Councilman Kosachik wants to do and adhering rigidly to the old plan. And that middle ground is let's just do another study on the traffic patterns and see if it actually still supports 8 versus maybe 6 lanes. Right now there's only 4 on each side, or 4 total on Broadway in that corridor, and that's clearly not enough.
Sam, what do you think of what the councilman's proposing here?
I think, once again, Steve Kay shows that he's the only person on that council who's really going to step out and lead when he needs to. And I think this is a really good idea for something that we need to look at. We need to get the legislative authority and do it. Maybe it does make sense to widen to 6 lanes. But Broadway, I drive on it most days. It's not that awful. And yeah, we do need to plan for the future. But right now, that means we have to fix the roads we have because they are a mess. So anything we can do on that front, I think this is a very good idea. I think this is something we need to pursue.
All right, the Arizona legislature wrapped up work this week, got a budget through very early in the week, and then took care of the lingering legislation. Finally got to sign a die yesterday. What do you see as the big winners and losers in this legislative session, Jeff?
Winners are owners of private prisons and private prison cronies that have been involved with Jan Brewer for years. Winners are the wealthy. They sneaked through practically in the dead of night yesterday another tax cut for wealthy people, which is basically a capital gains cut. They say it's a job creator. That's a big lie. Capital gains taxes are usually paid when you flip real estate, when you sell stocks or bonds, when you sell other large pieces of property like that. Losers are the people of the state of Arizona. People on health care. We're the only state in the nation now that has no version of kids' care. We are at the lowest in socioeconomic coverage and education, in treatment of middle class, lower middle class, and poor people who have no health care. We've seen 4 years of the worst legislation in this nation's history. Now, think back. In the 100 years ago, we came into the nation as one of the most progressive states in the nation. We had some things like initiatives and referendums and recalling of politicians that few, if any, other states had. And now here we are 100 years later, and we're the most regressive of all of the states and become one of the most backward states, and we're at the bottom of almost every criteria of judging the health and welfare of a state. And I blame the Republicans for that, and I'm telling you they're going to pay a really serious price at this next election.
Sam, winners and losers.
Well, obviously I have a pretty different list than Jeff does. I think the winners are the taxpayers of Arizona. For the first time since 2007, we have a balanced budget that's not balanced on gimmicks or trick fixes. Last year, they had to do a lot of borrowing money from this account to that account. We saw them have to sell the state capitol. This state legislature and Senate has done everything they could within the constraints of our budget to maintain services. We've seen an increase in this budget in education funding. We're doing everything possible to keep the minimal state services going. But right now, the revenue's not there. So we had the 1% sales tax. That's about to expire. They've got to do some good planning. This is a very strong budget for the state. We're finally put in a position where we can start planning for the future again and start creating some stability, both for individuals and businesses moving forward to start creating more jobs.
Well, this legislature cut $2 billion from K through 12 education over the last 2 years. They gave back $100 million of that, which is 1/20th of that. So that pittance of an increase in educational funding doesn't get anywhere near to restoring the draconian cuts that took place over the last several years. It's just embarrassing. It's embarrassing sometimes to be from this state with the Republican leadership that we've had in Phoenix for the last 4 years, and it's about to come to an end, thank God.
Okay, we've got 45 seconds left, but the governor also pushes some personnel reforms. Sam, your thoughts on that proposal?
I think it's a great opportunity when you have someone in the private sector who makes 70% of what someone in the public sector makes for doing their exact same job. That's not right. These reforms finally get us on the path to being able to create some efficiency in our state government.
All right.
Well, those figures are absolutely not true. Welcome back to the crony politics and boss tweed era, and instead of the era of having professional government people doing their jobs. This is just an embarrassment. This is something the Republicans came up with, civil service, a professional class of workers who were exempt from politics, and they should be embarrassed.
All right. Thank you guys for being here. That is our show for tonight, but you can keep up with the latest in political news by visiting azpm.org/yourvote. While you're on the website, we'd love to think what you thought about tonight's program, so please leave a comment. And be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Stay tuned next for the News Hour, and then at 8:30, tune into Arizona Week for an in-depth look at education funding in the state. On Monday, Arizona Illustrated talks with 4 state lawmakers about the concluded session. I'm Jim Nintzel. Thanks for watching, and have a great weekend.